Hey everyone, welcome back to Miniature Painting 101, a series of videos where I teach you all about painting miniatures from start to finish and everything in between. Yes, and this is part 104, arrows, how to freehand arrows on shoulder pads or whatever you want. You see, after my previous episode, somebody pointed out to me that a more simpler shape that's actually more common on Space Marines would be an arrow. So they wanted me to show you how to do clean arrows because they actually could be a little challenging. So we're going to do it today on this Tactical Marine Sergeant from the Imperial Fists. And the challenge for this one is that we're going to use a darker color on this pattern than the background color itself. So you got to keep it very clean. And so we'll start with Abaddon Black. So here's how I paint arrows. Now arrows you can do just completely around the outside to freehand, but here's how I prefer to do arrows. I like to go down just by starting with creating a vertical line along the center of the shoulder pad, going about 80 to 85% up the shoulder pad. And this is how I create my arrows, starting at the very bottom, working my way upwards. You see, the way that I like to do these kind of symbols is I find that it's much easier to keep nice, clean, straight lines if you have another line in reference. So if you want to do a perpendicular line, or you want to do parallel lines, or you want to connect lines, it's easier to keep nice, sharp lines rather than freehanding the entire symbol. So what we're going to do is, now that we've had this vertical line down the very center of the shoulder pad, this is going to create our reference point for the arrow. The top of this line was actually going to be the very tip of the arrow. So now we're going to create a cross by just doing a perpendicular line about 55-60% up that previous line. And you can do as long as you want on each side, but just try to keep them equal on both sides. And this is going to be the point of the arrow. So as I said, it's a very simple way of creating an arrow because now that it's much easier to do a perpendicular straight line in a cross shape than to actually freehand the entire shape from the outside. You can tend to get it a little warped. So now that we've got our cross, this is ultimately going to dictate our arrows. Now what we're going to do is we're going to connect each arrow on each part of the cross to the top to create a nice, sharp arrow tip. And as I said, it's actually quite easy to do this when you're connecting lines. I find it much easier to do nice sharp lines when you're connecting lines versus when you're just freehanding blindly. So creating sub shapes like this is a great way of saving yourself some time. And as always, I should mention, I did thin down this paint. I always use thin paints when freehanding, so I thinned it down with some Lamea medium. So now we've created the tip of our arrow. So now what we're going to do is create parallel lines along the bottom part and connect them to the top. Try to go equidistant from the center line. So as you can see here, I created two more lines, nice and sharp and straight, equidistant from the center point, and now that we've created our arrow, and that's it. And now all we do is fill in the arrow with the, of course, thinned down Abaddon Black. So let's thin it down, as always, and just fill in the arrow. So as you can see, just starting to fill it in a little bit at a time, getting nice, clean brush strokes. Of course, that was just to clean up that line as well, to make it nice and sharp and straight. The key is when you're doing a pattern with a very dark color on top of a very light color like yellow, the key is you can't screw up as much because you can't really clean it up with the background color. If you do, you have to go with the gray and then go with the yellows on top of that. So you got to be very careful, and that's why I highly recommend breaking it down to subshapes and then filling it in, creating the skeleton and filling it as I normally did with my shapes. And that's it. So now we have our arrow completely filled in. I'm going to take gray liner because I want to make it a little older looking. I don't like to use just black. I'm going to go around the perimeter with gray liner and have black in the center. Just create a little bit more worn out of a symbol. But I'm essentially going to use the gray liner as the cleanup color because I'm just going to go nice and clean along the edges and clean them up a little bit as I go and sharpen them and make them nice and straight. And by sharp, I mean like a nice sharp point at the edges of each of these arrow tips, for example, because there's three very strong tips on this arrow. You really want to keep them nice and sharp and clean. It takes a little bit of practice. I didn't thin down my gray liner because it's from the Reaper range, so it's very nice and thin anyway. And this is, it'll be the cleanup color. So I'll just go nice and carefully along the tips. And now that I already have the shape created, it's actually much easier to keep that straight lines, as I said. And that's what I love about doing things with arrows and freehand is I always like to break it down to sub shapes. And as I said, it's always easier to go nice, clean, straight lines if you have a reference point. Another line to intercept, another line to connect, another line to go perpendicular or parallel to. And that's it. So we're just going around our arrow and cleaning it up with the gray liner, leaving the black in the center. And here's what the final product looks like. As you can see, it is a nice, clean arrow. So start off by making the cross, connect to the top, and then go with parallel lines along the bottom. And that's it. I know it's a very simple shape to do, but somebody pointed out to me that it's actually more common on most Space Marines than the two shapes I've done previous, and it's a simple shape to start off with. So thank you as always for watching this episode of Miniature Painting 101. And stay tuned for part 105, which is just around the corner next week as always. But if you don't want to wait for next week, check out The Warp. Click on the link below for a free 14-day trial to my premium YouTube channel, where not only will you get to see the next 6 months of Miniature Painting 101 episodes before anyone else, you'll get to see over 100 start-to-finish painting tutorials, battle reports, face-off episodes, an Airbrush 101 series, just tons of wargaming content that I know you'll love. Go check out The Warp. Until next time, this is Jay saying, happy painting, everyone.